Welcome back, deep divers. Today we're going deep, really deep into the world of consciousness research. Buckle up, because we're about to unpack some truly mind-bending findings coming straight out of MIT. These scientists, they're doing some incredible work getting closer than ever before to understanding how awareness, that thing that makes you, why you, actually works in the brain. Just imagine being able to pinpoint the exact neural activity that makes you, well, you. It's like, whoa.
It really is remarkable. This research is really pushing the boundaries of what we know about the brain. And what they're finding is that consciousness, it's not some kind of vague, mystical concept. It's all about how different parts of the brain work together, a beautifully synchronized way.
Okay, so walk me through this. What's actually happening in our brains when we're conscious?
All right, so think of it like an orchestra. You've got your sensory areas, right? The parts of the brain that take in all the sights, sounds, smells, everything. And then you've got your cognitive regions. These are handling the thinking, the decision-making, making sense of all that sensory input. Now, for you to be conscious, these two areas, they need to be in constant communication, like different sections of the orchestra playing in perfect harmony.
So it's all about communication between different parts of the brain. Got it.
Yeah.
But how does that communication actually happen? What's the mechanism?
That's where brain rhythms come in. They're like the conductor of the orchestra, coordinating the activity of all those different brain regions. And each rhythm, well, it has its own specific role. You've got your low-frequency rhythms, like alpha and beta waves, and those help filter out familiar information, the stuff your brain doesn't need to pay attention to all the time. And then you've got the faster rhythms, like gamma waves. Those signal new or surprising information.
So it's like your brain has its own little internal radio, tuning into different frequencies for different levels of awareness.
Exactly. That's a great way to think about it. And what's really cool is that researchers have been able to actually study how these brain rhythms change during anesthesia. Turns out, anesthesia kind of disrupts the communication between different brain regions.
Wait, so you're saying anesthesia messes with your brain waves?
It does, yeah. Think of it like a phone call where you can hear the other person, but they can't hear you. That's essentially what's happening to your sensory areas under anesthesia. They're still receiving information from the outside world, but they can't communicate that information to the cognitive parts of your brain.
Ah, that makes sense. So that's why you're not aware of what's going on, even though your senses might still be picking things up.
Precisely. And this has some pretty big implications, not just for understanding anesthesia, but also other states of altered consciousness, like coma. If we can figure out how to restore that communication between brain regions, well, we could potentially help people regain consciousness after brain injuries, or even, develop new treatments for conditions like epilepsy.
Wow, now that's what I call a deep dive. Going from brain waves to anesthesia to potential medical breakthroughs, this is amazing.
And we're just getting started. This MIT research, it's opened up a whole new world of possibilities, not just for understanding consciousness itself, but for exploring its implications in fields like artificial intelligence and ethics.
Okay, you've definitely piqued my curiosity. Let's talk about those implications. But before we get into AI and all the ethical stuff, there's this other concept from this research that I want to understand better. This idea of top-down regulation. It sounds like our thoughts can actually influence what we pay attention to. How does that work?
Well, it's not quite mind control, but it is a fascinating example of how our higher-level cognitive processes can influence our sensory experience. Imagine you're looking for your keys in a really cluttered room. Your brain, because it's focused on the goal of finding those keys, it prioritizes visual information that might resemble keys, filtering out all the other distractions.
So it's not just our senses passively taking in information. Our thoughts are actually shaping what we perceive.
Exactly. It's like your brain has a spotlight, and your thoughts, well, they can direct that spotlight to focus on what's important at any given moment. And this is super useful in everyday life. It lets us focus on a conversation even when it's noisy, or find our way through a crowded street, even learning a new skill, by directing our attention to the relevant information.
Okay, so this top-down regulation helps us cut through the noise and focus on what matters. But are there any practical applications of this knowledge? Like, could we use it to, say, improve people's focus or attention span?
Absolutely. This research could have a major impact in developing new therapies for attention disorders like ADHD. By understanding how the brain regulates attention, we might be able to develop interventions that help people improve their focus and cognitive control.
That would be huge for so many people. But it sounds like this research goes beyond just medicine, right? You mentioned AI earlier. What's the connection between consciousness research and artificial intelligence?
Well, one of the big questions in AI research is whether we can create machines that are truly conscious. And if so, what would that even look like? And this research on brain rhythms and communication between brain regions, it kind of gives us a possible roadmap for building more sophisticated AI systems.
So you're saying if we can understand how consciousness works in the brain, we might be able to replicate those processes in machines.
Exactly. By mimicking the way different parts of the brain interact, we might be able to create AI systems that show some of the same characteristics of consciousness, like the ability to learn, adapt, and make decisions based on complex information.
Wow, that's both exciting and a little bit unnerving. It makes you think about what it really means to be conscious and whether machines could ever truly experience the world in the same way that humans do.
It definitely challenges our assumptions about intelligence. It forces us to confront the possibility that consciousness might not be something unique to biological beings.
This is a lot to think about. It feels like we're entering a whole new era of understanding the mind, both in humans and in the machines we create. Where do we go from here? What are the next big questions that researchers are grappling with in this field? It feels like we've only just, scratched the surface of this whole consciousness thing. So many big questions still out there.
Yeah, definitely. One of the biggest mysteries is how all that amazing brain activity we talked about, how it actually leads to like subjective experience. You know what I mean? We can see what's happening in the brain, the patterns of activity that go along with different states of awareness. But how do those physical processes actually create the feeling of what it's like to be you, to experience the world from your own unique perspective? That's still a huge mystery.
It's like we can see the orchestra playing, right?
Yeah.
We can see the instruments, the notes, all that. But we still don't really get how that music turns into the emotion we feel when we hear it.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And this question of subjective experience, it's really tied to the question of whether machines can ever be truly conscious. Like, if we could build a machine that perfectly mimicked the brain activity of a conscious human, would it actually have that same inner experience? Would it feel like something to be that machine?
Now, that's a mind-blowing question.
Yeah.
I mean, we might be able to create machines that act intelligently, that solve problems, that learn, but could we ever create machines that actually feel, that have their own inner world, thoughts and feelings and all that?
It's a question philosophers and scientists will probably be debating for a long time, and it has huge implications for how we think about AI in the future. Like, if machines become conscious, do they have rights? Do we have to change our whole ethical framework to include these new forms of intelligence?
Wow, those are some really big questions to think about. And this MIT research, it's given us a whole new perspective on what consciousness even is, how it works, and the potential it has, not just for understanding ourselves, but for shaping the future of technology.
What's really amazing is how this research has taken us from these tiny brain cells and synapses all the way to this huge concept of consciousness. And it leaves us with a sense of wonder, at how complex and incredible the human mind really is.
Well, dear listener, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of consciousness. We hope you've enjoyed the journey and maybe come away with a new appreciation for the mystery and wonder of your own awareness. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and never lose that curiosity about the world around you and the universe inside you.
Yeah, it really does feel like we've just begun to explore this whole world of consciousness. So many more questions to ask. What are some of the big unanswered questions in this field? The stuff that keeps consciousness researchers up at night. Well, one of the biggest mysteries is still like, how does all this incredible brain activity, how does it create subjective experience? We can observe the neural correlates of consciousness, the patterns of brain activity, but how do those physical processes actually create the feeling of what it's like to be you, to see the world from your perspective? That's still a really deep mystery.
Yeah, it's like we can see the orchestra playing, we can see the musicians, the instruments, the notes, but we still can't quite grasp how that music becomes the emotion we feel when we hear it.
Exactly. It's a great way to put it. And this whole question of subjective experience, it's tied to that other big question. Can machines ever really be conscious? I mean, if we build a machine that could perfectly mimic the brain activity of a conscious person, would it actually have the same inner experience? Would it feel like something to be that machine?
Whoa, that's a really tough one. Like, we might be able to create machines that act intelligently, machines that can learn and solve problems. But could we ever make a machine that actually feels something, that has its own inner world of thoughts and sensations?
Yeah, it's a question philosophers and scientists will be debating for, I think, a very long time.
Yeah.
And it really makes you think about how we interact with AI in the future. I mean, if machines do become conscious, Do they deserve rights? Do we need to completely rethink our ethical framework?
Definitely some heavy stuff to consider. But this MIT research, it's really opened our eyes to what consciousness might actually be, how it works, and all the incredible potential it has, not only for understanding ourselves, but for shaping the future of technology and AI and, well, everything, really.
It's amazing to think that this research has taken us from, tiny little brain cells and synapses all the way to this huge idea of consciousness. And it leaves us with a sense of wonder, right? A sense of awe at the complexity and beauty of the human mind.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the world of consciousness for today. We hope you've enjoyed exploring these ideas with us and maybe learned something new about that incredible universe inside your own head. Keep those brains buzzing, deep divers, and we'll catch you next time